Would you have guessed that one of the reasons video games are protected under the First Amendment was because of this guy?
So who are you, man?
I'm the party pooper.
It's true, but not in the way that you think. In 2005, Arnold, then the governor of California, fought for a bill that banned the sale of violent video games to those under 18 and required additional labeling beyond that of the already established and effective ESRB.
No shit.
This case ultimately made it to the Supreme Court, where it was struck down 7-2, and video games were considered an art form, granting them free speech protection.
To be or not to be? Not to be.
But there's a second half to this story which goes all the way back to 1993, with a feud between Nintendo and Sega, and the congressional hearings surrounding the sale of games like Mortal Kombat to kids with no rating system in place. So let's look at the reason you get to watch this and enjoy this.
Oh, jump three! And he was like, holy crap!
Because of the Governator and Scorpion.
Stick around.
Let's start at the beginning with Nintendo, who was just as family friendly back in the mid 80s and early 90s as they are today. To avoid market saturation, they had a strict process for selecting which games made it to their new system, the SNES.
Now you are playing with power.
They were the dominant name in consoles, accounting for 90% of the sales in a $3 billion market. Sega looked to compete with its Genesis console and took a different, more edgy approach, and allowed more third-party games to be published. They also took this approach to their advertising strategy.
What Nintendo?
And it worked. By 1992, Sega had usurped Nintendo's reign and held 65% of the market, marking the start of the console wars. Then, Mortal Kombat came out in October of 1992. It was violent and extremely popular in the arcades, and it was only a matter of time when it would be ported to consoles, which, in 1993, it was to both the SNES and Genesis. However, both companies saw that the violence could have a massive impact on sales, so they took steps to censor the game, only Sega was a little more crafty. While Nintendo and Sega both removed things like blood and fatalities, Sega did two extra things. First, it created its own regulatory board called the Video Game Ratings Council and gave Mortal Kombat an MA13 rating. Second, it put in a cheat code which spread quickly that restored the game back to its arcade state. The result was Sega's version of MK outselling Nintendo's 5-1. Around this time, Senator Joseph Lieberman caught wind of violent video games like Mortal Kombat and, in a nutshell, cried out,
"Won't somebody please think of the children?"
So, on December 9th, 1993, one day before the original Doom was released, Congress held a hearing to basically say, if the video game industry won't regulate itself, the government will. During these hearings, Nintendo and Sega took healthy swings at one another.
This is a copy of the packaging. There was no rating on this game at all when the game was introduced.
By the end, everyone agreed to adopt a rating system to help parents make better informed choices, and Sega's system wasn't going to cut it. The government was ready to step in with the Video Game Rating Act of 1994 if the video game industry's solution was subpar. Luckily, it wasn't, and at the second hearing in March of '94, Congress was appeased enough to let the industry regulate itself after they presented a commission to establish the rating system. In July of '94, the Entertainment Software Rating Board was introduced and was fully adopted in September. And so, violent video games were still allowed to exist and now had a rating like movies. And one thing that I find really funny is Mortal Kombat 2, which released after all of this happened, included friendships as well as fatalities. There is one key quote though that I do want to point to.
In America, an awful lot of freedom, and we cherish it, we want it, we deserve it, and we're not going to let it go.
See, while the ESRB was an overall win for video games, they still weren't protected under the First Amendment, and video games would remain a focal point as a cause for violence for years, leading to many politicians and lawyers to fight for more regulation around violent video games. While we won't touch on the tragic examples some cited video games as the cause of, just know that it was a seemingly relentless assault on the industry. Jump forward to 2005. Arnold Schwarzenegger is the governor of California, and a bill is introduced by former Senator Leland Yee that would ban the sale of violent video games to those under the age of 18, require even more labeling on top of the ESRB rating, and fine anyone $1,000 for breaking the law. The video game industry did not like this and prepared a lawsuit, and were granted a preliminary injunction, a fancy word for pausing the game, while the courts looked at the bill. In 2007, the district court ruled in favor of the industry, saying the law violated the First Amendment and there was a lack of evidence that video games caused violent behavior. The governor was not happy. He appealed the decision and brought the case to the Ninth Circuit, which also struck it down in 2009. One of the big takeaways from this court's ruling was that there was already a voluntary system in place, the ESRB, to rate the games appropriately. Arnold appealed to the Supreme Court in May of 2009, and they agreed to hear the case. A lot of organizations submitted amicus briefs, a written statement that is submitted by those who aren't party to the legal case, but can offer expertise and insight. Microsoft, Activision, the Entertainment Consumers Association, and even industries outside of gaming, like the Motion Picture Association of America and Recording Industry of America, all tossed in their support through amicus briefs. During this time, Arnold was voted out, but the case continued, and in June of 2011, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 in favor of the industry. Video games were protected under the First Amendment and considered free speech. The majority stated, like the protected books, plays, and movies that preceded them, video games communicate ideas, and even social messages, through many familiar literary devices, such as characters, dialogue, plot, and music, and through features distinctive to the medium, such as the player's interaction with the virtual world. Further, the majority added, reading Dante is unquestionably more cultured and intellectually edifying than playing Mortal Kombat. But these cultural and intellectual differences are not constitutional ones. Crudely violent video games, tawdry TV shows, and cheap novels and magazines are no less forms of speech than the Divine Comedy, and restrictions upon them must survive strict scrutiny. And so, where does that leave us? Well, imagine that this didn't go the way of the industry. What if it was upheld that the states could individually regulate the sales of certain video games, age gapping them as they see fit, on top of the already established ESRB? Maybe your favorite streamer would never have existed.
You're such a... Okay, man!
Great content creators may have never sat down to voice their opinion on a game or topic.
It's kind of funny that this was considered shocking back in the day, especially compared to the they're putting in these modern Mortal Kombat games.
Or possibly your favorite esports superstars may not have, or maybe even wouldn't have had the option to engage in gaming.
Whoa! I don't think we've ever seen that before!
In short, we'd likely be looking at a starkly different entertainment landscape than today. From esports to streaming to VOD content, everything would have shifted in a different direction. While that's all hypothetical, it's easy to imagine the worst outcome once a precedent has been set.
This one got T written on it. It says teen. What's it mean when they say violence?
When they say it's violent, it's not really violent.
And while violent video games will continue to be put under a microscope, at least for now, we can thank Mortal Kombat and Arnold for getting us to where we're at today.
Hasta la vista, baby.